Hello comrades, it's TheFinnishBolshevik. Let's continue our series on political economy. This time we're going to talk about transition from manufacture to machine industry in the history of capitalism. As long as production was still primarily based on hand labor, as was the case with manufacture, capitalism still could not achieve a radical revolution in the economic life of society. If you remember from last time, in manufacture, even though capitalists already had big workshops with a lot of workers working in them, they were still on the same technological basis as basically medieval production. They were still done by hand. This would all change with the transition from manufacture to machine industry, which began to take place in the last third of the 18th century and spread throughout the principal capitalist countries of Europe and the USA during the 19th century. The material technical foundation for the revolution was the machine. Every developed machine consists of three parts. 1. The motor mechanism, 2. The transmitting mechanism, and 3. The working machine. The motor mechanism is the moving force of the machine. It makes the machine go. It either generates the power itself, as in the case of a steam engine or even a diesel engine, or it obtains it from the outside, for instance from natural forces such as a water wheel or a windmill. The transmitting mechanism transmits the energy throughout the machine, so it has cogwheels, belts, could be electrical wires, whatever it is that transmits the energy. And it also changes the energy when necessary and distributes it to all the different parts of the machine. And lastly, the working machine is what acts directly on the object of labor and produces the desired changes in it. The working machine is basically a proxy for a human being or a tool used by a human being. For instance, if you have an automated machine that puts on screws, it's basically just mimicking a human being putting on screws with a screwdriver. But even though these machines, even if sometimes on a very abstract level, they mimic actions of a human being using a tool, these are no longer hand tools. They are machine tools and machines. In its pursuit of profit, capital acquired in the machine a mighty means of increasing the productivity of labor. First, the use of machines, which put a multitude of tools into operation simultaneously, freed the production process from the narrow limits imposed by the limitations of the human limbs or the human body. Second, the use of machines provided for the first time the possibility of employing in production powerful new sources of energy, such as steam, gas, and electricity. Third, the use of machines enabled capital to place science at the service of production, extending the power of man over nature and revealing ever new possibilities of raising the productivity of labor. On the basis of large-scale machine industry, the domination of the capitalist mode of production was consolidated, and in large-scale machine industry, capitalism found its appropriate material and technical foundation. Then, let's talk about the Industrial Revolution. Large-scale machine industry began in Britain. Why? Because there were certain favorable historical conditions. Serfdom had been abolished relatively early, there had been a bourgeois revolution in the 17th century, the peasants had been forcibly dispossessed, and a lot of capital had been accumulated by the ruling classes by the use of extensive trade and of plundering colonies. The transition from manufacture to machine industry happened first in the textile industry. The extension of the market and the capitalists striving for profit made an improvement in production technique necessary. In the cotton industry, which was developing more rapidly than other branches, hand labor predominated. The principal operations in the cotton industry are spinning and weaving. The product of the spinner's work serves as the material of the weaver's work. The increase in the demand for cotton cloth pressed in the first place on the technique of weaving. In 1733, the flying shuttle was invented, which doubled the productivity of the weaver's labor. This then led to spinning lagging behind weaving, so there was an urgent need to improve spinning technique. This task was solved by means of invention in 1765 to 1767 of spinning machines. The earliest of these machines were powered by human beings or draft animals, but later machines appeared which were operated by water power. Further technical improvement led not only to an increase in the amount of yarn produced, but also to improvement in its quality. At the end of the 18th century, there were already in existence spinning machines with up to 400 spindles, whereas the earliest ones only had 15 or 20. As a result of these inventions, the productivity of labor in spinning increased tremendously. There now arose in the textile industry another discrepancy. Spinning had outstripped weaving. This discrepancy was overcome by the invention in 1785 of a mechanical loom, which had completely ousted hand weaving by the 1840s. The first textile factories were built on the banks of rivers, and the machines were driven by means of water wheels. This greatly restricted the possibility of using machine technique. A new kind of power source was needed, which was not so dependent on a particular place or a particular season. Such a prime mover was the steam engine. The steam engine in its primary form was actually invented much earlier, already in the manufacturing period, and from 1711 to 1712 was in use in the English mining industry in the form of a pump for extracting water from mines. However, the Industrial Revolution in England gave rise to a demand for a universal steam engine, so in the 1780s, the pre-existing steam engine was perfected and put to wide use. The introduction of the steam engine was of enormous importance, because the steam engine was free from the numerous shortcomings of the water-driven engine. It's basically completely under man's control. It means that factories can be put anywhere, and not only next to rivers. The widespread use of the steam engine created the prerequisites for the appearance of large-scale factories with many machines and a large number of workers. Means were quickly found of using steam engines in other industries and also in transport. In 1807, the first steamboat was built in the USA, and in 1825, in Britain, the first railway was built. At first, machines were produced in manufactories by means of hand labor. They were really expensive to produce, and they were insufficiently powerful and precise. The manufactories simply could not produce such a quantity of machines as was required by a rapidly growing industry. This task was solved by going over to production of machines by machines. For the production of machines, railroads and steamships, an enormous quantity of iron and steel was needed, so metallurgy began to develop quickly. Of great importance in the development of metallurgy was the discovery of a method of smelting iron ore with mineral fuel instead of with charcoal. The blast furnace was improved, and new methods of melting steel were discovered. The spread of the steam engine and the growth of metallurgy also created a need for enormous quantities of coal, which led to a rapid growth of the coal industry. Now, luckily for Britain also had a lot of coal. As a result of the Industrial Revolution, Britain was transformed into the industrial workshop of the world. After Britain, machine production also spread in other countries of Europe and America. The Industrial Revolution in France took place in the course of a few decades, immediately following the Bourgeois Revolution of 1890 to 94. In Germany, owing to its feudal disunity and other feudal remnants, the Industrial Revolution took place later than in Britain and France. Large-scale industry began to develop in Germany only from the 1840s onward, and advanced especially quickly after the unification of Germany into a single state in 1871. In the USA, large-scale industry arose at the beginning of the 19th century. American machine industry began to develop rapidly after the Civil War of 1861 to 65. In Russia, the transition from manufacture to the machine stage of production began before the abolition of serfdom, but developed to its full extent in the first decades after the abolition of serfdom in 1861. However, even after the fall of serfdom, numerous survivals of feudalism and serfdom in the countryside hindered the transition of industry from hand to machine production. Then, let's talk about how capitalism industrializes society. The Industrial Revolution marked the beginning of capitalist industrialization. The basis of industrialization is heavy industry, the production of means of production. Capitalist industrialization takes place spontaneously, in response to the capitalists' drive for profit. The development of large-scale capitalist industry usually begins with the development of light industry, that is, the branches producing consumer goods. These branches require a smaller investment of resources, and capital circulates faster than in heavy industry. In capitalism, heavy industry begins to develop only at the end of a more or less prolonged period of time during which light industry piles up profits. These profits are gradually pumped into heavy industry. As a result, capitalist industrialization is a process which takes many decades. Now you can compare this to socialist industrialization, which is much faster, requiring perhaps only 5 to 10 years. In capitalist Britain, for example, the textile industry which is light industry, for a long time remained the most developed branch of industry, and only in the second half of the century heavy industry began to play the predominant role. The same order of succession and development of branches of industry occurred in the other capitalist countries too. The more large-scale industry grew, the more rapidly the limitations and inadequacy of steam as a motive force became apparent. A new kind of mover was invented, the internal combustion engine, at first using gas in 1877, and then an engine working on liquid fuel, the diesel, in 1893. And in the last third of the 19th century, a new and powerful force appeared in the arena of economic life which revolutionized production still more: electricity. History has seen various paths of capitalist industrialization, basically three different alternatives that capitalist countries can use. The first path of capitalist industrialization is the path of conquest and plunder of colonies. That is how Britain's industry developed. Having conquered colonies in all parts of the world, Britain pumped enormous profits out of them for 2 centuries and used these profits to build industry. The second path is the path of war and the imposition of indemnities by victor countries on defeated countries. Thus, Germany, after defeating France in the Franco-Prussian War, obliged her to pay 5 billion francs as indemnity and then used these funds to build industry. The third path is the path of enslaving concessions and loans, which leads to the less developed country becoming enslaved and dependent on the highly developed capitalist country. Tsarist Russia, for example, granted concessions to foreign companies and also obtained loans from Western powers, attempting in this way to advance gradually along the path of industrialization. However, countries can also use any combination of these. The history of the economic development of the USA offers an example. The large-scale industry of the USA was created with the aid of foreign loans and long-term credits, and also by the way of unrestrained plundering of the indigenous population of America. Now, despite the fact that advanced capitalist countries have had their industrial revolutions already centuries ago, the vast majority of people in capitalism still work with primitive technique. Then let's talk about the growth of capitalist towns and the formation of the city proletariat. Capitalist industrialization caused a rapid growth of towns and industrial centers. The number of large towns in Europe, with the population exceeding 100,000 people, increased 7-fold during the 19th century. In Britain, already since the middle of the 19th century, and in Germany, since the beginning of the 20th century, more than half of the population was concentrated in towns. In the period of capitalist manufacture, the masses of wage workers did not yet represent a settled class of proletarians. The wage workers in the manufactories were relatively few in number, and to a considerable degree they were connected with agriculture. They were also dispersed among a multitude of relatively small workshops, and were also disunited by all kinds of narrow craft interests. But as a result of the Industrial Revolution and the further development of machine industry, an industrial proletariat was formed in the capitalist countries. The working class grew rapidly in numbers, its ranks being continually reinforced from those of the peasantry and craftsmen who were being ruined. With the growth of large-scale machine industry, the local craft and caste interests and prejudices of the earliest generations of workers gradually started to disappear, along with the workers' utopian aspirations to somehow roll back the clock and return to a pre-capitalist period, to the position of a medieval craftsman. The mass of workers were thus welded into a single class, the proletariat. In Britain, the number of workers tripled from 2 to 6 million between 1820 and 1920. In France, the number of workers doubled from 2 to 4 million between 1860 and the beginning of the 1900s. In the US, the number of workers grew from 2 to 7 million during the late 1800s, and in Germany from 1 to 5 million in the same period. In Russia, after the abolition of serfdom in 1861, the number of workers grew from 700,000 to 3 million in the next 25 years.